The evening air clung to the walls of Ashburn House like perfume gone stale, the kind that no longer enchants but lingers to remind one of better days. Within its grand ballroom, the pride of the Earl's lineage, 1,000 candles shivered in crystal chandeliers, casting splinters of light across polished marble floors. Gowns rustled, violins soared, and conversations fluttered like fans in restless hands. To the untrained eye, all appeared splendid. But to those who understood the subtle language of society, there was a quiet tension beneath the gold and lace's scent of judgment, sweet and poisonous. It was the night meant to celebrate the forthcoming engagement of Lady Eleanor Ashburn to Lord Percival Harrow, and the world had come dressed to watch her future unfold or be dismantled. Lady Eleanor stood at the edge of the great hall, no more than a pale figure pressed against distant marble. Her gown, a soft shade of crushed rose, carried grace, but not novelty. Those with sharper eyes noticed the discreet stitches along the hem, the kind that spoke not merely of practicality, but necessity. She was not famed for remarkable beauty, nor fortune, nor lively wit. Rather, she was known for a kind of quiet defiance of dignity that refused to wilt, even when confronted with scorn. Tonight, that dignity was tested the moment she entered. Invitations had been sent with ceremonial charm, but expectations were sharper than knives. Those gathered wished to see grandeur. What they saw instead was a young woman attempting with all her might to conceal the waning state of her family's coffers. Across the ballroom, her intended Lord Percival arrived fashionably late, wearing pride like a perfumed cloak. His boots shone, his smile dazzled, his laugh floated with calculated ease. The crowd welcomed him with the warmth reserved for those already deemed victorious. He approached Eleanor with the air of a man bestowing favor rather than greeting a betrothed. "My dear," he murmured, barely allowing his lips to move as he offered his arm, "shall we not falter tonight? One must play the part given, after all." She nodded calmly, though beneath the lace at her throat, her pulse began to thrum like distant drums. They entered the procession of dancers, and as they passed through murmuring rows of spectators, whispers nudged one another like conspirators. The dance began with the gentle rise of strings, couples turning like petals caught in a breeze. Yet when Eleanor stepped forward, her shoe caught on the hem of her gown. A stifled laugh came from somewhere close to sharp to be accidental. A moment later, a cruel calculation was set into motion. A rival lady brushed past with intentional grace, her heel grazing Eleanor's skirt. The tear was small, but it spread like spilled ink. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. Eleanor straightened instantly, her face composed but pale. She bent with grace to lift the damaged edge, wishing only to disappear without notice. Percival's expression darkened, not with concern, but irritation. He positioned himself 2 paces away, as if proximity itself might stain him. "My lady," he whispered through tight teeth, "you are drawing eyes. Pray, retire before matters worsen." She looked at him not pleadingly, but steadily, and offered the faintest of curtsies before withdrawing to the edge of the hall. No tears came. She refused them. Still, there was no place to stand without being seen. Her humiliation had taken shape and was now traveling from mouth to mouth. A circle of debutantes gathered, their smiles pitying, their laughter light but cutting. "That gown was worn last season," one murmured. "Repairs," another observed. "A poor choice for such an occasion." And then, as easily as one folds a fan, they turned their backs. It was then that the War Duke saw her. He stood apart from the revelry, dark figure beside the towering windows. Duke Edmund Ravensbane whispered about on every continent, feared across battlefields and drawing rooms alike. Society pretended to welcome him, but fear tasted too much like awe to be truly polite. Rumor claimed he had been born with ice in his veins. Some said he prayed only before war, and even then, not for mercy. His jaw bore a thin scar, his attire stark a soldier's restraint amidst silk and shimmer, yet his eyes, sharp as a falcon's, followed Eleanor's every movement. She felt his gaze before she saw him, like a sudden chill in a warm room. When her eyes lifted at last to meet his, she expected pity or disdain. Instead, she found something far rarer: attention without cruelty. The Duke did not turn away when others did. He observed the torn dress, the solitary posture, the manner in which she straightened her shoulders despite the weight of shame. And beneath the rigid mask he wore, something imperceptible shifted, like frost yielding to flame. The rest of the night descended like a quiet storm. Percival recovered his charm quickly and resumed the center of attention, his laughter carrying through the halls to mask his earlier avoidance. Ladies admired his candor and offered sympathetic sighs, as if he were the wounded party. Eleanor remained still against a marble pillar, an unspoken apology in her posture to her father, to propriety, to the expectations of a world she could not afford to disappoint. Yet even in disgrace, she refused to shrink. The Duke noted this. Every flicker of candlelight on her profile, every controlled breath she took, seemed to etch her deeper into his thoughts. As the final waltz was called, the crowd gathered once more in graceful formation. Eleanor remained unchosen. That was the greater shame more than any tear in fabric. No partner dared to offer his hand. A silent indictment. A social execution. Yet she curtsied to the musicians as the song ended, as though she had danced every step. Such gestures are seldom noticed, but the one who noticed held power enough to rewrite her fate. When the guests began to disperse, Edmund Ravensbane approached the Earl with polite formality. From the shadows, Eleanor observed, their voices too distant to decipher. Yet when the Duke turned and glanced directly into her eyes, the world seemed to still. There was no smile, no warmth, only a certainty that bordered on dangerous. He inclined his head no lower than dignity permitted, but enough to acknowledge her presence in a way no other had all evening. She returned the smallest nod, as though compelled by a force she barely understood. And then he left, his footsteps echoing through the great hall like the steady beat of war drums. Outside, lanterns flickered along the drive, bending in the wind as his carriage passed into the night. Lady Eleanor watched from a high window, one hand resting upon the torn hem of her gown. She felt no triumph, no security, only the strange awareness that she had, in a single evening, been both discarded and discovered. The ballroom had judged her unworthy. Yet the War Duke, a man who had never bowed before kings, had bowed to her. And though neither spoke a word, something irrevocable had changed. The gossips would insist she was promised, and therefore beyond pursuit. They would say no man of honor would dare challenge an engagement so publicly sanctioned. But they forgot one thing. Edmund Ravensbane had built his life on conquering the impossible. That night, whispers rose like smoke from every corridor, carrying her name to the edges of the realm. Still unseen by all, the Duke made a silent vow. She would not be forgotten. She would be fought for. Days passed, though they carried a peculiar weight, as though time itself hesitated before stepping forward. Ashburn House remained outwardly composed, yet its halls stirred with quieter agitation. The Earl, worn by debt and dignity alike, preserved ritual and routine. But his footsteps grew increasingly deliberate, as though each choice now carried invisible consequence. Eleanor, too, carried herself with greater restraint than ever before. She could not erase the memory of her humiliation in the ballroom, nor could she forget the moment her eyes met the Duke's, a moment brief, nearly wordless, yet heavy enough to alter the rhythm of her heart. Since then, she found herself watched more closely than before, and not all gazes were kind. A woman need only endure one public embarrassment to become thereafter an object of scrutiny. Invitations still arrived, but the cursive felt colder, the tones less trusting. She had become, without act or intention, subject of subtle controversy. Yet it was on a quiet morning, several weeks after the ball, that the first token arrived. A small parcel, wrapped with care rather than extravagance, lay upon a silver tray presented by the butler. No sender, no explanation. Inside rested a pair of gloves, exquisitely tailored, finer than any she had ever worn. They were fitted to her exact measure, as though her hands had been studied with reverent precision. Beneath them lay a simple card, no signature, no flourish, only a sentence written in a hand both bold and restrained. For the lady who should never be made to feel lesser than a room. She stared at the words for a long moment, her breath shallow, her mind aflame with questions she dared not voice. Her father entered just then, and she slid the gloves beneath a book, not wishing to invite conversation. Yet secrecy never offers full shelter from consequence. It only delays it. Later that week, as Ashburn House hosted a modest musical evening, the second token arrived, this time unmistakably public. A bouquet of wildflowers, heather and thistle arranged among soft sprigs of lavender, appeared in the drawing room just as guests began to arrive. It drew immediate attention, for it was not grand in the fashionable sense. Rather, it bore the elegance of places untouched by polite society, tucked into. The stems was a card bearing the recognizable seal of the War Duke. Its message was as precise as a sword's edge for the lady who stood her ground. The guests exchanged glances as their feet crossed the threshold. Conversations turned. Fans stiffened. Though no improper word was written, every implication was clear. Lady Eleanor had been singled out by the Ward Duke not as a courtesy, but as admiration. Some gasped with envy, others with judgment. Percival alone concealed his fury beneath an immaculate smile. The effort of restraint was almost audible. He did not confront Eleanor at once. Instead, he let the minutes grow heavy with unspoken tension. During the intermission, among the soft hum of instruments being tuned, he approached her. His tone was hushed, his eyes sharp as polished steel. "I should hope," he said, "that your conduct remains above suspicion. Appearances are fragile things. You must not allow them to break," she replied with quiet composure. "I encouraged nothing," yet her cheeks betrayed emotion, and he seized upon it. "Encouragement lies not always in words," he murmured, "but in the way one blushes at them." She held his gaze, and for a moment he seemed almost unsettled by her refusal to shrink. Nevertheless, his pride guided his next words. "If you must be admired, Eleanor, at the very least, choose a gentleman acquainted with restraint, tanned not merely with victory." The Earl, meanwhile, felt the tremors of scandal before they reached his name. He sensed the direction of whispers and grew grave with worry. The Duke's interest could mean deliverance from debt, yet also ruin should society interpret it as impropriety. The Earl attempted to speak to his daughter one evening, yet found himself unable to express his mind clearly. Fatherly concern and social fear intertwined too tightly. "Your future must remain unclouded," he finally said, though his eyes spoke of much more. Eleanor received the words with patience, but felt an ache grow within her chest. Was a future unclouded also a future unloved? Public tension reached a subtle peak when Edmund Ravensbane arrived at Ashburn House one afternoon under formal pretext. He had requested an audience with the Earl to discuss investment opportunities tied to the northern estates, nothing improper. Yet everyone felt the air change when his name was announced. The servants moved with unusual caution. Eleanor remained out of sight, yet her awareness of his presence felt like a pulse beneath her skin. As Chancellor, perhaps intention, would have it, encountered him in the garden shortly after he concluded business with her father. There, among glass panes and trailing ivy, they exchanged their first true conversation. It remained proper, every word measured, yet beneath the spoken lay the unsaid. "I fear," he said softly, "that your strength goes too often unnoticed." She answered with a voice steady but pained. "It is not strength, your grace, but necessity." His gaze held hers without intrusion. Necessity may compel action, but it does not compose dignity. That belongs to you alone. She could offer no response to such words, for they were unlike anything offered to her before. Instead, she let silence speak for her. He lowered his voice further. "Forgive me if any gesture of mine has brought you distress. It was not my intention to wound, only to honor what ought never be disregarded." She withdrew a step, as though preserving what remained of lawful distance. "Gifts are heavy things, your grace. The world sees their weight even when intention is light." Their conversation ended without impropriety, yet misfortune seldom requires truth to shape a tale. A guest, having witnessed only the closing moment of their dialogue, believed far more had transpired. By nightfall, whispers flew like startled birds through drawing rooms across the county. Some claimed that the Duke sought to claim her openly. Others insisted she had courted his interest to elevate her station. The more her composure prevailed, the more scandal seemed to assemble around it. Percival, sensing the fragility of his claim, grew increasingly possessive. Though his affection was thinner than his pride, Eleanor found herself at the center of a storm she had never summoned. To defend herself would be to admit accusation. To remain silent was to risk forfeiture of her reputation. She walked the corridors of her home as though through a narrowing corridor from which there was no clear escape. Yet each time she recalled Edmund Ravensbane's voice measured. Unwavering, she felt a strange courage bloom, unwelcome but undeniable. She could not declare war, yet she could not surrender either. As society raised its brows and sharpened its judgments, she began to understand that her life had never truly belonged to her. But now, for the first time, she wished it would. That night, as she placed the gloves back into their box, she felt a tremor of certainty pierce her uncertainty. Something had begun quietly, dangerously far beyond etiquette's reach. She feared it. She craved it. And she knew with unsettling clarity that the world around her would not let it continue unanswered. The age would demand its price. Love, if it existed, would demand much more. The morning sky wore a solemn gray, the kind that promised neither rain nor sun, but a quiet endurance. Much like the days that now defined Lady Eleanor's life, society had begun its slow retreat from her, not in dramatic proclamations, but in subtle omissions dinners without invitations. Events where her name was absent from the guest list. Those who still greeted her did so with excessive politeness, as though she had become a delicate thing, liable to shatter if spoken to too plainly. Her father bore this shift with weary disappointment, though he never voiced blame. He simply walked slower, wrote longer, and stared more frequently, toward ledgers he could not balance. Their lives did not collapse. Rather, they began to lean, like a house on uncertain foundation. Eleanor sensed it with every breath. Lord Percival, by contrast, remained as present as ever. His visits were not softened by affection, but sharpened by urgency. He sought to accelerate their marriage with increasing insistence, declaring that scandal was best silenced by swift union. When he spoke of honor, he did so loudly enough for others to hear. When he spoke to Eleanor alone, the tone was lower, yet far harsher. One afternoon, in the drawing room where flowers once bloomed in vases now left bare, he offered her a folded note. "Sign this," he said calmly, "and I will make the date official. The rumors will fade, your family's name will remain intact, and I will be commended for grace." She read the documentan agreement of marital intent, hastily drafted yet ironclad. Setting it aside, she looked at him with a stillness he mistook for meekness. "Your grace," she said gently, "is not yours to bestow if it comes at the cost of mine." His eyes hardened. "There are things more valuable than pride, Eleanor. Do not mistake stubbornness for virtue." She kept her composure. "Pride, my lord, is yours. Virtue is not mine alone. It belongs to those who still believe in me." The remark struck him not as defiance but insolence. He left without ceremony, his silence trailing like a threat. The Earl found her shortly afterward, sitting by the window with the unsigned paper still lying on the table. He looked upon it, then upon her, and his shoulders sagged. "My child," he said, his voice gentle but frayed, "you must understand that a father's strength is not endless. I do not ask you to marry without hope of affection, but with hope of preservation." She listened, for she loved him dearly, but love cannot suffocate without consequence. She placed her hand over his, steady yet trembling. "I will not bring shame upon you," she whispered, "but I fear I may drown if I surrender what little faith remains in my heart." He said nothing else, only nodded with pained resignation. In that moment, she understood that duty was a noose fashioned with velvet. One might wear it willingly, but its strength remained unyielding. It was on a storm-bound evening, when rain battered the windows like impatient knuckles, that fate took a decisive step. Edmund Ravensbane arrived unannounced, his carriage lanterns flickering like restless spirits. The servants hesitated, but he insisted upon seeing the Earl with polite urgency. As thunder rolled across the sky, spoke with the Earl behind closed doors concerning matters of finance, investments, securities, possible relief from debt. Eleanor, attempting only to pass through the corridor, paused when she heard her father's voice rise in shame. "I will not sell my daughter's hand as collateral," the Earl declared, his tone a mix of pride and helplessness. Edmund's reply was low but resolute. "I do not deal in collateral where a woman's life is concerned. I deal only in choices, and Eleanor must have one, even if the world denies it to her." She felt tears gather before she could stop them. She did not wish to listen, but her feet would not carry her away. When the conversation grew softer, she finally retreated, though her heart pounded like a drum at the edge of war. Later that night, she ventured into the small library to steady her thoughts. The lamps burned low, and the scent of rain drifted through an open window. To her surprise, Edmund entered moments later. He halted, clearly not expecting anyone. Their eyes met, and a silence bloomed, neither tense nor comfortable, simply inevitable. He did not approach her, nor did she retreat. Rain softened the world outside into a hush. At length, he spoke. "I can leave if you wish it." She shook her head slowly. "No, I prefer truth to secrecy." He inclined his head, as though acknowledging a pact. The fire crackled, the shadows lengthened, and both seemed to understand that this quiet moment lay beyond propriety, yet not within sin. Edmund's voice, when it came, carried neither triumph nor apology. "War taught me to measure the worth of what I fight for. That is why I chose my words carefully with your father. I have raised cities with less deliberation than I have chosen a phrase to speak to you." She could not answer at first. The shock of such candor held her still. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled, but did not break. "You speak as though my fate is yours to determine." He stepped no closer, yet his gaze felt near. "No, I speak as though I would see you determine it yourself." The room felt suddenly vast, yet her thoughts felt cornered. She turned toward the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. "If I choose wrongly," she murmured, "I may destroy my family." His answer came without hesitation. "Then choose wisely, Eleanor, but do not choose fear." Thunderclap split the sky. Startled, she drew a quick breath, her hand lifting instinctively to her heart. In that unguarded instant, he reached forward, not to take her hand, but as though steadying the air between them, offering presence rather than possession. She met his eyes, and for the first time, she saw not the war duke, but a man bearing the weight of many battles. "If you were mine," he said softly, "I would see the world bow before you rather than watch you bow to it." Her reply emerged like a confession. "I am not anyone's, your grace. That is the tragedy of it." It was not an invitation, yet it was not a refusal. It was the truth she had carried silently through years of practiced obedience. They parted without any touch. Yet something passed between them, something quiet, undeniable, and dangerous. When Edmund left the room, the fire seemed to dim in his absence, as though even flame recognized his departure. But what neither saw was the shadow at the doorway. Someone had overheard enough to twist the moment into something damning. As dawn began to pale, the storm-drenched world, Percival sent word. He would break the engagement unless she agreed to marry at once. Pleading conduct, unbecoming a lady. The accusation was veiled, but its threat was direct. She realized then that promises could become weapons, and loyalty could be wielded like a blade. Yet though her world now trembled on its axis, Eleanor felt something strange rising within her, not surrender, but resolve. She had been offered one thing she'd never expected, a choice. Now she must decide whether to live for caution or for truth. The day of reckoning arrived, clothed in courtesy, as all perilous days do. The engagement gathering was not announced as such, but everyone knew its purpose. It was Percival's stage his chance to reclaim honor by putting Eleanor firmly under his name. The carriages lined the drive in stately procession, and guests emerged draped in fabrics brighter than their intentions. Ashburn House had been polished into splendor, yet the atmosphere felt taut, as though the walls themselves braced for collision. Eleanor stood before her mirror, feeling not beautiful nor hopeful, but starkly aware. She was not merely a woman today. She was a verdict awaiting judgment. Her gown was flawless this time, untouched by repair, yet she felt more exposed than ever. There are garments a woman wears which society cannot see fear resolve. And the memory of nearly losing oneself, when she entered the drawing room. The conversations dimmed as though signaled by unseen conductor. Heads turned, curtsies deepened, but the air did not warm. Mourning can hide inside manners. Percival greeted her with the grace of a man performing sentiment. His bow was immaculate, his smile sharpened by rehearsed sympathy. "We have endured much," he declared to the room. "Not to her, but honor can rise even from misfortune if we stand unwavering beside what is right." No one missed the implication. He painted himself as the noble protector of a misguided lady. Eleanor remained silent, not from agreement, but to conserve strength. The Earl watched from the far end of the room, his face lined with helplessness. Percival continued, his voice carrying lightly across polished floors. "Some might have doubted her virtue. I never did. That is why I stand ready to fulfill my oath and make her my wife." The pause that followed felt curated, as though he expected admiration. Yet admiration did not rise, only waiting. Eleanor met his gaze. He believed he had cornered her so neatly that resistance would appear madness. She felt the walls close, yet inside her something remained untouched. She thought of Edmund's words, "Do not choose fear." Her heart answered with a tremor that did not break her composure. Duke Edmund Ravensbane arrived without declaration, yet his presence altered the air like a sudden change in weather. He walked through the doorway with composed command, not bowing to anyone's surprise. Conversations halted. Percival stiffened but masked his discomfort behind etiquette. Edmund's attire carried no excess, only stark precision. Black coat, dark waistcoat, single-gloved hand, resting against a walking cane that was never used. He paused only once when his eyes found Eleanor. No word passed between them. Yet it was as if two forces, long drawn toward one another, recognized that distance could no longer be maintained. Percival stepped forward, maintaining civility. "Your Grace, an unexpected visit?" Though perhaps not entirely unforeseen. He left room for suspicion to grow, then addressed the listeners. "We must be cautious of impropriety. Some gestures may appear harmless, yet speak otherwise." Edmund turned, his expression carved in quiet steel. "Then let us speak directly. I will not hide behind polite ambiguity." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Percival lifted his chin. "There are rules to keep a lady safe, Your Grace, and promises to uphold." Edmund's answer came like a controlled flame. "Rules are no safeguard when wielded by cowardice, and promises are not upheld when used to corner the helpless." The room fell utterly silent. Society thrived on spectacle, yet recoiled from honesty. Edmund addressed everyone now, his voice even but irreversibly decisive. "If admiration for Lady Eleanor has caused scandal, then let scandal fall upon me. I have pursued her not to tarnish her name, but to defend it." He spoke without theatrics each word, chosen with soldier's economy. "I do not ask that she'll be given to me. I ask only that she be permitted the dignity of choice. If she accepts me, I will bear any consequence. If she does not, I will leave this house and never speak of her again." It was the purest violation of social land, the noblest. Eleanor felt heat rise within her chest, not from embarrassment, but from a strange, liberating recognition. In this moment, she was no longer a figure of pity. She was a woman asked to speak rather than merely be spoken for. Percival attempted to interject, but Edmund's gaze alone halted him. "A vow," Edmund said, looking now only at her, "should not cage the heart it binds. Lady Eleanor, I do not offer rescue, only respect. Will you choose your path today, before all who would shape it for you?" The room held its breath. The Earl whispered her name, a plea and a farewell intertwined. Eleanor stepped forward not dramatically, but with quiet finality. Her voice, when it came, carried across the silence with undeniable clarity. "Lord Percival," she said, "you speak of forgiveness often, though I never sought it. Yet compassion cannot grow from condescension. You would offer me grace, but grace that stands above me. Percival stared, uncomprehending. She continued, "A vow is not sacred when it requires a woman to vanish beneath it." No one moved. "I release you from our promise," she said, not in defiance, but in truth. "I will not walk into a future where I must ask permission to breathe." Murmurs rose like wind through trees. Percival bowed stiffly, his pride wounded beyond repair, and left without farewell. All eyes returned to Eleanor, expecting a display of triumph or collapse. They found neither. Instead, they found stillness, an unassuming strength that unsettled vanity. Edmund approached, his expression unreadable. But when he reached her, he did not take her hand. He bowed deeply before the entire assembly. Then, in a voice low enough that only those nearest could truly hear, he asked, "Lady Eleanor, may I one day have the honor of earning your hand?" She did not smile. She only inclined her head and answered, "You may have the honor of walking beside me if honor indeed is what you seek." There was no applause, only the recognition that something had shifted. Not merely between two hearts, but in the order by which hearts were judged. In the days that followed, society would search for scandal or romance to attach to the tale, but in truth, it was neither. It was a bargain of equals, forged not in secrecy, but in sight of all. And though many believed the story ended there, it had only drawn its first honest breath.